Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I have with me today Mr. TS Tirumurti. He is India's permanent representative to the United Nations in New York. Welcome to the Print Ambassador, and thank you for talking to us. So, my first question, obviously, to you, now that India is going to become a non-permanent member of the UNSC again, this is not the first time, but since it last held that position in 2012 till now, a lot has changed. So I'll first ask you, what are the changes that you can see, or you're witnessing the way the United Nations has changed in all these years?
Yeah, thank you, Nayanima. Thank you very much for having me in your program. No, you're right in saying that the world of today is certainly not the same as the one we had when we were in the Security Council in 2011-12. And the change in a decade has been quite dramatic. For one, we are in the midst of a pandemic, and that has really taken the world, as well as a multilateral system that was not prepared to handle this crisis, by complete surprise. So consequently, we need to now deal with a COVID and a post-COVID world, which promises to change some of the priorities which UN and the member states may have set for themselves. This is, of course, a very dramatic change. Further, the P5 are more divided now than before, and there are fissures between these countries. These differences are only widening. The challenge now is to bring these countries together so that they can contribute meaningfully to peace, security, and development. Otherwise, the countries on which these differences will directly impact are the developing countries, particularly those countries which are vulnerable in categories like LDCs, the small island developing states, the LLDCs, etc. There is also a greater need for countries to respect the integrity and the sovereignty of states and strengthen a rule-based international order. And this is something which the External Affairs Minister had in fact articulated. So COVID cannot be an excuse to violate them. We are in the danger of deviating from these basic principles in the world of today. And finally, the resistance to reform by some powers which are keen on preserving the status quo is making the UN, particularly the UN Security Council, unrepresentative and therefore unresponsive. This effectively means a certain marginalization of the UN in the context of the various urgent issues, including COVID. Consequently, the UN of today is definitely far more complex and far less united than ever before. But India has the capability to bring countries together to work towards the common good and welfare of mankind. And we have done that before, and we hope we will do it again.
Mm-hmm. So my next question will be, you've raised some of the very pertinent questions. First, division within the P5 nations, and then today's UN is a much more complex UN, and the fact that we are facing a pandemic. Now, in the light of all this, what do you think India will seek to achieve as some of its top priorities?
Nayanima, our External Affairs Minister, if you recall, has set forth our priorities for the Council. And we have an agenda which is actually very inclusive and responsive to the needs, particularly of developing countries, and to bring about international peace and security. As Prime Minister mentioned in the recent UN General Assembly, we will use the prestige and experience of being the world's largest democracy and bring that to bear on our tenure on the Security Council. Our priorities include a range of issues, which includes terrorism, including cross-border terrorism, taking up the reform of the Security Council in the larger context of the call by our Prime Minister for reformed multilateralism, strengthening of peace and security, particularly peacekeeping, where, as you know, our peacekeepers have done our country proud over several decades of dedicated peacekeeping in all parts of the world, giving greater focus to people-centered development, especially using digital technology and greater involvement of women and youth, and strengthening peace building through development cooperation, democracy, human rights, and institution building. Of course, I know the agenda may be a bit ambitious, but we are determined to pursue these during our stint in the Security Council.
Sir, also in the context of the COVID, the UN Secretary General has given a call for a global ceasefire, which many countries have, supported. What is India's position on this?
We respect and appreciate the call of the Secretary General for a global ceasefire, and we certainly hope that countries in the world, around the world, will respect his call. It is not enough to support his call, but it is equally important for countries to abide by his call. Now, for example, the Security Council, in the context of the Secretary General's call, they passed a resolution calling for cessation of hostilities for about 90 days. However, the Security Council was equally clear in making an exception for countries to fight the scourge of terrorism. So consequently, the resolution makes an express provision that fighting of terrorism will be exempt from this call of cessation of hostilities. And this is precisely what India has been mentioning, that we cannot have a call for ceasefire while terrorism, particularly cross-border terrorism, as well as aggression against territorial integrity of countries, they go on around the world. So countries will act and will have to act in defense of their sovereignty and national interest. For example, even Russia, which has broadly supported the call of Secretary General on global ceasefire, has clearly indicated that it does not extend to fighting against terrorism. Therefore, it is more important for countries to act on the ground to stop hostilities rather than paying lip service to support Secretary General's call and use it as a smokescreen to continue to do what they are doing now. This is our stand, and this is what India has been advocating, that we need countries to give up terrorism and aggression and abide by a rules-based international order, respect the integrity and sovereignty of countries, and also emphasize on the need for peaceful resolution of disputes.
When you talk about territorial integrity, the thing that comes in the mind is the question of China. Now, coming to China, on the issue of COVID again, do you think India will be building up pressure on China when it is there at the UNSC, having known the fact that, and we have also reported about it, how India has joined efforts by other countries to have a fair investigation on the origins of the virus?
Yeah, I think you are referring to the resolution in the World Health Assembly, which was co-sponsored by India and several other countries. Now, this called upon the Director General of the WHO to identify the zoonotic source of the virus and the route of introduction to the human population. I think we approached this issue with an open mind. But you're, of course, aware that even before WHO put out its advisories, India had taken proactive steps on travel, etc., which helped considerably in delaying the spread of virus in India. So be that as it may, I don't think this resolution is targeted at any particular country, and there has been no judgment passed on anyone. However, countries think it is important to determine the source of the pandemic so that we remain prepared for future eventualities. You would have also seen Prime Minister Modi's pledge during the UN General Assembly that India's vaccine production and delivery capacity will be used to help all humanity in fighting the crisis. I think we need such leadership at this point.
Also, Ambassador, if I can ask you, what about the reform of the UN? Now, that is also something Prime Minister came down very heavily upon the UN during his UNGA speech, and he was very clear that developing countries have to be part of the decision-making process. Now, when India will be there at the UNSC in this point of time, will this be one of the top priorities? How long are we going to wait to be in that position?
Yeah, I know you're right. Prime Minister had very clearly articulated the need for UN reform as well as for India's inclusion in the decision-making structures of the UN. This is an architecture which was put in place 75 years back, when the UN had just 51 members and many parts of the world were still under colonial rule. Today, the UN is 193 members, and developing countries like India have started playing a major role in shaping world issues. And multilateral, and in the international discourse. So how can the UN Security Council be representative? And countries like India are excluded from the decision-making structures of the UN. However, the entire process of reform is being held, in my opinion, hostage by a small group of countries which are preventing others from moving forward on the reform process. And they're also stopping any move to start a text-based negotiations under the guise of insisting that every one of the 193 countries should agree. So I think they are hiding behind this, if I may use the word smokescreen, and stopping all progress. And they have been doing it for a decade or even more. And we see this effort by the small group of countries as anti-developing countries, since they're effectively ensuring that Africa, Latin America, India, and others are kept out of the UN Security Council and are prevented from playing a larger role. So it's time that the emerging and the developing countries of Asia, Latin America, and Africa make this group accountable for stopping progress in the UN Security Council reform. And it's not going to be easy, but we are determined to pursue this.
Also, when we talk about reform of the United Nations, the thing that comes in the mind, and also this has been something that India has been talking about, is on the sanctions committee for terrorists and the entities that they run. Do you think they also need to be reformed? Because we've recently seen Pakistan's attempt to put Indian nationals in the 1267 terrorist list, which failed. However, how can India ensure that these kind of attempts can be effectively thwarted?
No, you asked a very important question. See, it is important that we take a look at the functioning of all entities and ask ourselves a very simple question. Have they been effective in discharging the functions which they were mandated to perform? If not, how can they be made more effective? The Security Council has established several sanctions committees. Some of them have been more effective than the others. There is a tendency for countries to politicize the functioning of sanctions committee, particularly, for instance, 1267, dealing with terrorism, terrorists, and their entities. And a country like Pakistan, which has the largest number of terrorists in these lists and continues to be the epicenter for supporting terrorism, is actually now playing the victim card and trying to divert the attention from the atrocities in their own country on Muslims and other minority communities. And recently, as you have pointed out, Pakistan tried to put on this list of terrorists 4 innocent Indians to try and convince the UN Security Council members that they are actually terrorists. And they have also, by doing this, given this matter a religious color. But as you know, the Security Council completely rejected this attempt of Pakistan, and their attempt was thrown out of the council. And we thank those countries which stood by us in seeing off Pakistan's clumsy attempt and thereby vindicating our own stand on this. So the main issue with Pakistan is its support, moral, diplomatic, financial, physical, and a lot of other ways to terrorists that target other countries in our region.
On the issue of CCIT, the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism, now that is also an initiative that India had taken long time back, and it had attempted every time at the UN to have this adopted. It's been pending for so long. How do you think this time can India effectively push for CCIT? Is the appetite still there?
The Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism is a long pending subject, as you know, before the UN. And CCIT seeks to prohibit states from facilitating or allowing their territories from being used for terrorist acts and enable states to cooperate in suppressing terrorism and also in punishing the perpetrators, the abettors, financiers, facilitators, and collaborators. And we see CCIT as complementing rather than replacing the existing instruments, addressing certain aspects of terrorism. But the negotiations on it have stretched for more than a decade. And you're right, we will need to give it a fresh push, especially since the issue of terrorism has come to the fore in many international fora and not just in the UN. So we hope to do that.
So lastly, I know you are having a very busy time at the United Nations. Coming to the final question on Pakistan's efforts with proper support from China to rake up the issue of Kashmir. We've seen that happening a number of times since last year, since August move of abrogating Article 370. India has been constantly thwarting those attempts. But what is the final solution to it? Because Pakistan will continue to raise that matter with the support of China.
Actually, we have made it very clear to everyone that Jammu and Kashmir is an internal matter for us. And UN is not the forum to discuss this matter or even any issue relating to our bilateral relations with Pakistan. And thanks to our reaching out to members of the UN Security Council, Pakistan's attempt to rake up this issue of Jammu and Kashmir in the UN Security Council has practically no takers. This is the reason why there has been no formal meeting of the Security Council on the Jammu and Kashmir issue since 1965, and I mentioned it earlier as well. So this should by itself convey a very clear message to Pakistan, which of course chooses not to hear any wise counsel. So if there are any bilateral issues with Pakistan at all, we can always address them under the Shimla Agreement and the Lahore Declaration.
Mm-hmm. So just a follow-up question on that. How do you see China constantly doing this? Do you think now China will sort of take a step back now because of the pandemic and the COVID issue and investigation going on?
See, I'll put it this way, that they have raised it, and especially in the last meeting, which took place, as you know, in August, and they had practically no takers in the UN Security Council for this. So I think a clear message has reached them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for talking to ThePrint, Ambassador, and thank you for your time. Please take care.
Once again, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much, Nayanima.